Financial experts are sounding the alarm of the potential impacts of the global trade war sparked by President Trump's tariffs. They say that it could trigger a slump in shipments to the U.S. and empty shelves in stores. Supply Chain Logistics Group's Vision reports a drastic drop in shipping container bookings from China to the U.S. in recent weeks, as we see here in this chart. And data from the Port of Los Angeles shows a declining volume of imports as well. Let's welcome into the conversation Craig Fuller. He is the founder and CEO of FreightWaves. That's an organization that provides data and analytics on the freight and logistics market. And he joins us this morning from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Great to have you this morning, sir. Let me just ask your response to that chart you see. We also have these warnings about pandemic-like shortages on store shelves. How concerned are you?
Yeah, I think it's a real issue. It's a real concern. I mean, it's going to bring people's memory back to COVID when we had all sorts of shortages. This could happen again. So really what's happening is companies have paused shipments into the United States. And in doing so, it means that a number of products will not be readily available and won't be in inventory when consumers go to purchase those things.
I want to play for you something that the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said on Monday when asked whether he had any concerns about shortages. Take a listen.
Are you worried about empty shelves?
Not at present. We have some great retailers. I assume they pre-ordered. I think we'll see some elasticities. I think we'll see replacements.
Mark, is that a fair assessment that retailers would have already pre-ordered for this, that they would have been able to get it in front of this?
Yeah, I think for some of the larger big box retailers, they've been planning for the past year. But when you look at a number of small businesses and a lot of medium-sized businesses, they didn't take precautions. I think people expected that tariffs would happen, but I don't think anyone foresaw 145% tariffs. And let's not forget that we're not just talking about retailers, but things like your air condition to go out. So a lot of the appliance and parts for machinery and air condition units are actually sourced from China. So you could be in a situation in July, and because these companies have not imported these products, have not imported these parts, it could be a situation that your air conditioning goes out in the middle of July and you call your technician and he can't get his hands on parts anytime soon. So you could be without. So these are the concerns. When you actually disrupt a supply chain to the degree that we are currently doing, there are going to be things that you normally would expect to receive, you normally expect to be able to purchase, you normally expect to enjoy, are not going to be there.
And how soon before consumers start to see that or feel that? And where do you see it first? What products?
Yeah, so I think it'll be intermittent. Probably won't even be something that you notice at first, and that could happen as early as June, so about a month out. When you're really going to start to feel the pain, probably it's going to be noticeable by most consumers, is in the back-to-school period. So this is really early August when parents and moms are going out to buy their kids things like backpacks, school supplies, batteries, nutritional supplements, over-the-counter medicine. These are the types of items that you potentially will not be able to find at the stores. The good news is food. Shouldn't worry about food. We source most of our food here domestically, so not that concerned. But it's those low-end manufactured items, that stuff that we consume a lot of that's manufactured, are the ones that are of the biggest concern.
Yeah, I mean, I've even seen like on platforms for women who are expecting, warnings about getting car seats in advance, warnings about getting strollers in advance, because so many of those products come from China. Craig, what about the impact to jobs and potential layoffs? You have 9 million people who work in trucking. You have 19 million people who work in retail. What would you say, as someone who follows the space really closely, to someone who works in one of these industries, is hearing this interview and wondering, should I be concerned about my job?
Yeah, it's a real concern. There are 9 million people who work in logistics nationwide across the United States that move products throughout our supply chain. If you think about the fact that we've had a 35% drop off in imports into the United States, that likely to stay persistent for some period of time. When we look at what it will impact domestically, so we still source a lot of products in the U.S. About 20% of the trucking volume across the United States is actually imports. So we're thinking we could see a 5 to 6% drop of total freight across the U.S., and that could mean anywhere from 400 to 500,000 potential job losses in logistics alone. You mentioned retail. one of the things that retailers need is inventory, and if they don't have inventory, they're not going to have as many sales, and if you don't have as many sales, you don't have the need for as many people. So these are sort of these secondary impacts, and that's assuming that it doesn't actually go much further into things really across the whole economy.
And then what about, one thing that we've obviously seen is an announcement on a tariff and then maybe a deal or an announcement about a deal coming. And so a little bit of a sort of a walk back of that. When we get these deals ultimately, or when we get a concession of some sort, how much does that undo any potential damage at the ports, undo any potential damage on store shelves? Or as I've also seen, being reported, some of the damage is already done, whether you undo it or not.
Well, it's going to sound ridiculous, but supply chains have an enormously long lead time. So I'm going to say something that is absolutely going to seem absurd, but there is a potential of what's happening right now, even if we get a deal in the next 3 months. I'm specifically talking about China. Even if we get a deal, you could have problems getting your hands on holiday goods. And so things about Christmas, those Christmas gifts, it sounds absurd, but you might want to start doing your Christmas shopping right now, because when you go to shop in the stores in October, November, and December, the items that you would expect to normally see may not be there, or the selection may not be there. So that sounds insane, but because of the long lead time, because companies order these products 6 to 9 months in advance, it just takes a long time to move through the supply chain. So go ahead and prepare now.
Yeah, that is a wild thought. And the procrastinator in me, Craig, that doesn't do a lot of my Christmas shopping until December 23rd, is sort of having a little meltdown. But I appreciate the heads up. Thank you. That's Craig Fuller. All right, let's bring in Paul Donovan, the chief economist for UBS Global Wealth Management. He is with us from London this morning. Paul, great to have you. Let's start with that labor data. Yesterday, we learned that the number of open jobs in March fell to the lowest level in 6 months. What's interesting, though, in that same report is that layoffs seem muted. So how would you describe the state of the labor market right now in the U.S.?
Well, the first thing is we've got to be very, very careful in the precision of this data. It's a really unreliable report. And that's because essentially companies have stopped telling the government what they're doing with employment. The response rate's very low. But what we are getting a sense of from a wide range of indicators is that companies are just sitting on their hands. They're not firing workers, because the economy was doing very well at the start of this year. But given the erratic policy environment, the uncertainties that creates, companies are not choosing to invest in the future. And that in particular means that they are not hiring new workers. They are just keeping things steady for now.
So when does that lack of investment, in your words, start to show up in potential layoffs or not hiring and laying off people who are currently on the payroll?
Well, obviously, for certain sectors, that's going to be quite rapid if you are very much engaged in trade. So we know, for example, that volumes in US ports are collapsing. Now, that means that people who are employed in US ports face the risk of at least temporary unemployment. But then beyond that, people in the trucking sector face the risk of temporary unemployment. Fewer goods coming in, fewer goods to move around the United States. So if you're engaged very actively in the traded goods sector, you're very vulnerable. If you're in the service sector, perhaps less so.
Yeah, we know that there are 9 million people employed in the trucking sector, so that's a lot of people. Paul, let me ask, we're going to get some other key indicators on the health of the economy in just a few hours at 8:30 Eastern. We're going to get the first estimate for first quarter GDP. The caveat, obviously, being this is the first quarter before that April tariff announcement. But we're also going to get another measure on spending, inflation. What are you watching here? What are you expecting here?
Well, as you said, this is very much the before times. This is not going to capture the uncertainty and so on. And consumers, let's remember, are not really going to start to feel the effects of the trade taxes until the end of May at the very earliest, and more likely late June. So the full effect of that is later. However, what we are going to be looking for is whether consumers were pulling forward their purchases of goods, that they were hearing US President Trump talking about taxing them, taxing trade, and they're thinking, well, yeah, we were planning to redo the kitchen in the summer. Maybe we better do it now. Maybe we better bring forward those purchases. So we'll be looking for that pulling forward action in things like the durable good purchases that are detailed in today's data.
And what about any impacts to trade? I mean, I've seen some predictions that the GDP figure could in fact be negative because of that surge in imports that you were just talking about. What do you see there in terms of the trade impact?
It could well be, but I mean, that doesn't actually tell us a great deal about what is going on, because what we did see very clearly in the March data was this surge in imports. And again, that's because companies were frantically scrambling to get as much into the United States as they could before President Trump imposed the trade taxes. And so with that, you get sort of a front loading of demand, which is very much what we've been seeing in the numbers. And because imports are a drag on US GDP, a negative US GDP, that is something that could create some downside risk. But that's not really telling us anything about the underlying momentum of the economy. That's just telling us about the distorted behavior as a result of erratic policy decision making.